Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today it is time once again for Friday Reads. It is May 9th. I hope you've been having a good week. Mine's been pretty good. It's going to get even better this evening because my daughter and her boyfriend are coming for the weekend, along with her cat Moo, and so we're looking forward to that. But before I get busy making the house right for guests, I need to take a few minutes to go over the week in reading. So the big literary news this week was the Pulitzer Prize prizes, which were announced on Monday. And I was very happy and thrilled that my favorite novel from last year, James by Percival Everett, did win the prize for fiction. Possibly there might have been some drama or turmoil leading up to the award of this prize because there were 4 finalists instead of 3. And sometimes that means that the original 3 finalists that are presented by the jury to the Pulitzer Board were not completely, they either couldn't come to a decision or they weren't completely satisfied and they asked for a 4th selection. We don't know what all happened because they don't really divulge it. They don't even tell who's on the jury till after the prizes are announced. Something happened. There was 4 finalists, but James did win the prize. So I was very happy about that. I think it's well deserved. All the prizes that he's won for this novel, I think, are well deserved. I was hoping that another one of my favorites from last year that would have qualified, The History of Sound by Ben Shattuck, I was hoping that would also be a finalist, but you can't win them all. I did not read the other 3, so I cannot comment on whether or not I would choose one thing instead of another thing. The other 3 finalists were Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle. I'm kind of familiar with that one because it was on the Booker list last year, but I have yet to read it. I'm kind of interested in it. It's about some teenage girls that are in a boxing competition. And then there was also The Unicorn Woman by Gail Jones. This is an author that I have not yet read, even though her work has frequently appeared on various prize lists. And this is a novel about a Black man in the early 1950s who is a veteran of World War II, and I don't know what the title refers to. I don't know who the Unicorn Woman is because that's all I know about this book. It sounds interesting. And then the third one was a wild card book. Well, I say that because I had never heard of the book, but it's Mice 1961 by Stacy Levine, and apparently from what I have briefly looked up, it's about 2 young girls who are orphans and they're being raised by a housekeeper. And I guess it's in 1961, and that's all I got. So I couldn't find that one. That one was at no libraries that I have access to. I think that one just took everybody by surprise. So I do want to look a little bit more into these other finalists, but I'm just really excited that James, my favorite book, won. So yay. In television news, we are still watching I can't ever get the title right. Your Friends and Neighbors? I don't think it's My Friends and Neighbors. I think it's Your Friends and Neighbors. And it's a dark comedy about a man who lost his job and he's divorced and he's adrift and he's low on cash and the expenses just keep coming. So he takes to stealing things from the homes of his wealthy former neighbors. He really doesn't know what he's doing, and he gets in and over his head frequently. And he thinks that he has more leverage or more privilege than he actually does. And then it's just kind of a story about a bunch of people who have a lot of material goods, but they're all kind of lost and lonely. So it's kind of actually a sad show, even though there's humor in the show. I guess we're still watching The Last of Us, but I don't know. I can't tell you why it's not as good this season because that would be a spoiler, but it isn't. And it's gotten to be pretty predictable. You can kind of see where things are going. So I don't know. We might be out on that one. I just saw a bird outside. I swear the bird had a tortilla chip. It didn't come from our yard. We were not eating tortilla chips in the backyard. I probably have done that, but we weren't doing that this morning. But I just saw a grackle on the fence with a tortilla chip. We had a big storm last night. It was weird because we were just sitting and watching TV, and all of a sudden our phones went off, and I thought it was an Amber Alert, but it was a severe, it said something like 90-mile-an-hour wind, take shelter, don't sit by windows. It just came up out of nowhere. And so, of course, we just sat there and turned on the TV broadcast of it, and it was some sort of storm that had suddenly popped up with these heavy winds and possible hail. So it wasn't, nothing was happening right where we were, but it was in the area. So it was kind of coming our direction. So we went outside and moved a bunch of patio furniture, and we brought in some outdoor plants. In the process of which we accidentally brought in a lizard who then escaped, and we weren't sure where he went. And then we went, and it said, take shelter, don't sit inside, don't sit by the walls, whatever. So we sat in the hall for a while, and then we said, why are we sitting here? There's nothing happening. And Steve went to bed. So nothing did. It was just a thunderstorm here. Nothing really happened. But I guess it whirled up in some places. But then we did manage to escort the lizard back outside this morning. He stayed right there in the utility room. So now everybody's happy and the sun is shining once again. All right, let's talk about books. I did finish reading The Outsiders. This was the selection this month for the banned book club at my local library. And I had not read this since, I think, 7th grade. So it was really interesting to reread it as an adult. And at first, I think I had just started it last week, and I had mentioned it having this very YA feel. Well, at first, it felt a little bit dated in the scenarios and the style, but then I just got so caught up into the journey of Ponyboy in his, not just the plot, but in his thoughts and in his heart, and I just fell all the way down into it again. I remember when I was a kid, I think that what I pictured, because this book was written, I think, in the late 60s, and it was written as a contemporary portrayal of these teenage gangs in the Tulsa, Oklahoma area. I don't think I got the Oklahoma part at all when I was a kid. I think as a 12-year-old in the late 70s, when they talked about warring gangs, I think I was thinking of like American Graffiti era. I think I thought of like 50s gangs and or West Side Story kind of thing. And I don't think I got the setting whatsoever. But now I have a strong sense of the place that the story took place, especially when they leave the city and they go out into the countryside, Ponyboy and Johnny, and they hide in a church. I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but an incident occurs that necessitates young Ponyboy, who's only 14, and his best friend Johnny to go on the run for a while after an accidental something that happened. And he really is, Ponyboy, the narrator, is just such an enduring character. In some ways he's a trope, like the one kid in the tough circumstances, but he's the one that's really smart and sensitive, and he loves literature and poetry and all this kind of thing. But I don't care if it's tropey or not, because I really like Ponyboy. And he finds out as he starts to reflect on this situation, he's just coming into the age where he's realizing that everybody has multiple sides and much more depth than he gave them credit for. People that he thought he didn't like, he starts to see them in a different light. People he doesn't get along with, he starts to understand why. Not everybody can reach these insights at age 14, but Ponyboy is kind of an old 14 in his soul, and he starts to make these connections. And then there's just a lot of emotion, and there's tragedy, and it's just a really good story. So I'd be interested to hear the discussion when we get to the group at the library, and hearing about the reasons that maybe it has been banned. I don't know. They might think that it glorifies the gang situation and the violence. I'm not sure. Or somebody thought that. There's a very veiled reference that I never caught as a kid to an accidental pregnancy, but I completely missed this when I was a kid. It's very subtle. So I don't know if that's a factor. There's not really any graphic sex scenes or anything like that. It's just more about the relationships between this group of brothers and their friends. So I'm not sure what the deal was. Most of the time, I am not. Even when I know what the deal is, I still don't agree. So we'll find out about the banning history soon. Then the other book I read, or finished anyway, was a really strange one. I'm still thinking about it. It's going to be hard to describe this book. I can't even say it succinctly, and to give you some sort of a sense of the feel of this book. And that was On Such a Full Sea by Chang-Rae Lee. One reason I chose it is because I've had it on my cart for months and months and months, and maybe a year or two. It's definitely one of my bridesmaids books that has been on multiple TBRs, and I decided I absolutely need to read it this month. It's Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Here's a book in my possession by a Chinese American author that I haven't read, that I've been wanting to get to. Now's the time. So I did finally read this book. In the past, I read another book by this author called A Gesture Life, which was just a straight up literary fiction contemporary story that I liked. But this one's different. This one is a dystopian novel. And so I was thinking while I read it how that is kind of an interesting avenue when somebody who usually does not write speculative fiction, then they write one. And the reaction sometimes to that, sometimes people don't know quite what to do with that. Those who liked that author's overall body of work sometimes aren't quite sure how they feel about this speculative piece, especially if it's readers that don't usually read speculative fiction. Those who like science fiction and speculative and dystopian fiction, sometimes they don't know what to do with it because it's coming out of an author that hasn't previously written that. It's kind of, I think it just throws people off sometimes. And I think that might account for why it doesn't really have that high of a rating when I look at it up on Storygraph or Goodreads, because I thought it's actually quite a strong novel, but it's hard to categorize. It's quite strange, and it leaves you with a lot of unanswered questions. Some people really don't like that either. I've edited a bunch of stuff out and tried to explain this book like 3 times. It's really hard to explain without talking about it for 20 minutes. So I'm going to try one more time. Something we'll get into the edit here. So it's in the future, quite far in the future, but we don't know how far. And we're in the United States. We have some very brief comments about other countries doing things differently, but this is how the United States is. There's basically, you can live in 3 different categories. You either live in the charters, which are gated communities for very wealthy people. Picture the richest part of town, wherever you live, the kind of sense of competition in those families, the big houses, the high pressure stakes to get into certain colleges, that all that kind of stuff. That's how the people in the charters live. Then we have places like More, which is where our main character comes from. These are colony cities, grown out of old cities. Baltimore eventually has become More, and it is also a gated kind of structure where people live in communal family settings, and they produce goods and services for the people that live in the charters. The inhabitants of these colonies are people that have immigrated from other countries. More, where our main character begins her story, most of the people are of Chinese descent. They, at some point in the past, they were immigrated over, and they're kind of like a company town that works to produce fish and other commodities, kind of agricultural stuff for these cities. There's a relationship between these 2 entities. They occasionally accept a scholarship student into the charters, but and they both have a certain protocol, a certain order of life. And then in between, there's kind of a no man's land, and I can't remember what they call it. I think that, do they just call it the outside? I don't know. There's people that don't live in either place, and that's just kind of wild and woolly. So we know that something has happened that has caused instability in climate and also in human longevity. And there's people most people eventually die of cancer. They don't call it cancer, they just call it C, but they talk about chemotherapies and markers, and everybody is tracked. And if you live in these colonies, you do get a certain amount of treatment, but it's just kind of accepted that when your time's up, your time's up. If you live in the charters, you get a higher level of continuous monitoring and treatment for the disease that you might be presenting. But those people tend to eventually die of the side effects of the treatments. Nobody has figured out how to really effectively treat or eradicate these diseases. So that's the setup. That's the world setup. We have this collective narrator that's kind of representing these colonies, telling the story about a young woman named Fan who was a diver in these fish tanks, and how one day she left the walled community, and everyone assumes that she was going to look for her boyfriend Reg, who had previously left a few weeks prior. Nobody really knew where he went. As we have two different things going on. We have what's going on at Beemore, and then we have what's going on with Fan after she left. The whole story of Fan is a narrative story that is quite an interesting story. It has times of suspense and danger and everything, but we get the sense all along that the entire story is just conjecture. It's just folklore. Reg and Fan have been elevated in the minds of the people in Beemore to this kind of legendary status. They're graffitied onto walls, and so we get the sense all along that the story we're hearing about Fan, we have no idea if that's really the story. But it's such a good story. I mean, there's a lot going on. And so, and then meanwhile, back in Beemore, things are starting to, the orderliness and the structure is starting to fray a little bit. So it is a very odd story. It's kind of unsettling in good ways, where you're not quite sure what. I got to the end and I thought, what did I just read? What just happened? What was that really about? And what am I supposed to take away from this? But there's just a lot in there about, in the dystopian sense, there's a lot in there about how will we structure our communities in the future? What will we value? How will we make it work? How will we survive and continue in response to the deadly things we are wreaking on ourselves? Also, there's just things about human nature in here, and how people are jockeying for survival and viewing one another as commodities. And it's weird because the whole book's kind of slow paced, but then all of a sudden there's these really treacherous parts and things speed up. And some of the weirdest stuff I can't even get into because it's deep in the book and it would kind of ruin it. But there's a couple parts that are just so strange, but kind of beautiful and bizarre. And so I'm going to just categorize it as a very strange dystopian novel that I enjoyed. So that was On Such a Full Sea by Chang-Rae Lee. All right, so that's what I finished, but here's what is ongoing. I am reading Night of the Fiestas by Kristin, Valdez, Quade. I'm reading this for the Books in Bocadillos book club hosted by Mariandrea, and I'm more than halfway through. I think I have 3 or 4 stories left. I'm reading 1 or 2 a day, and I'm really enjoying this collection. It's pretty strong. There's a story in here called The 5 Wounds that she later expanded into a novel that is really strong. Also, I read a story yesterday called Family Reunion that I really loved. There are a lot of things in these stories about family. They're about complicated, problematic, messed up family dynamics, and I just love those kind of stories. And they really make good short fiction when a writer can kind of lay it all out and you get a good sense of it in just a short, 20 pages or whatever it may be. So the story I read last night called Family Reunion was about a young girl. Now, most of these stories take place in Santa Fe, but this one I think was in Salt Lake City. There's a girl who is not of a Mormon family, but everyone she knows at school is, and she tries to fit in by kind of adopting their lifestyle, going to church with them. She tries to assimilate herself, but there's always a barrier. And she gets invited along by a friend she's made, kind of an impromptu trip to go to this girl's family reunion. But the trip is not exactly what it seems. And she's caught right in the middle of some really strange family goings on. And it's just kind of, I don't know. I love a story with really well written children characters. And this is one of them. It was really good. So I am working my way through this, but thus far I'm going to come out and say I do recommend this. If you like short stories, they're not connected short stories. They're just good separate stories. I have not hit any clunkers. I've liked a couple of them more than others, but I have not hit any weak ones really. I've enjoyed it really well so far. And then I'm also continuing my daily poetry practice. And this week, I'm not reading a specific book, but I just went flipping through a couple of really old anthologies. So this one, Modern Poetry. And it's not that modern because this book was published in the early 60s. And so it's definitely cutting off before contemporary times. So this book was cracking me up. I've had this for decades. And the former owner was Flo Smoot. What a name. And Flo, she wrote on the back, gloves. She wrote her name. And then the only other time Flo wrote anything in this book was right here in the middle of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. And right by this paragraph about the yellow fog, she wrote, sensuous. So Flo had a moment there reading T.S. Eliot, and that's all she had to say from the whole collection. So this is not it's not a very complete collection. It cuts off at 1960, early 60s. There's only 2 women in here. There's no poets of color, so it is completely undiverse. But there are a few poems, some old favorites in here. So I tooled around in here and read some poems that I like. And then I also picked up this one that I got when I was a teenager called The Voice That Is Great Within Us, American Poetry of the 20th Century. Again, cuts off in the early 80s when I received the book. And it's a really thick book. It's 722 pages in this mass market size, but I've been enjoying just sampling poems that I've loved before and then noticing poets that I didn't read back when I had this book originally, but I've heard of them since and gone, oh, look who's in here. So I've just been having fun kind of, there's a gnat, go away gnat, just sampling around. And then last night I picked up The Great Gatsby. So I talked in my TBR how I wanted to read The Great Gatsby. I love The Great Gatsby. I've read it many times. I got inspired to read it again right now because it's the 100th anniversary of its publication and everybody's talking about The Great Gatsby. So I pulled out my lovely copy that was gifted to me by a dear friend and I started reading it last night and I'm trying to go slow and savor it all over again and see things that I maybe missed all the other times. I'm sure I'm going to find some. Yeah, I'm just right at the beginning when Nick is over at Tom and Daisy's and meeting Jordan Baker for the first time. And then coming up this week, I know I need to get into the Crucible. We're still talking about Death of a Salesman over on Endless Drama, but for the second half of the month, we're going to be looking at The Crucible by Arthur Miller. So I do want to read it this week. And this one is dimmer in my memory than Death of a Salesman was. And even that one surprised me with things I'd forgotten. This will be like starting all over and I'll talk about it soon. But I don't know what I'm going to pick up after that. You'll have to wait and see. So I hope that you have a great weekend. I know we will be having a nice one. If you are celebrating Mother's Day, I hope you have a lovely one. And I will be seeing you soon this upcoming week. I don't know what all I'm going to cover. I might do a tag, and I definitely am going to do a video about an upcoming project that I want to talk to you about. So take care, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.